Welcome, welcome. My name is Zach Olson, and as always, thanks for joining us today for another installment of the Iowa Center's Small Business Essentials series. A couple notes before we start. We are recording so we can share this presentation on our website. So if you want to watch again or know someone who couldn't be with us today, that should be up a little later this week. Please also keep an eye on the chat function. We will be sharing links and resources throughout, and we want to hear from you. So don't hesitate to submit your questions and comments in there as well. Okay, owning and operating your own small business means understanding what is needed for you, your customers, and your future goals. And to do that, you need a good plan. 2020 has taught us a lot of things so far, but right near the top of that list is the importance of having solid short and long-term plans that are both thorough enough to keep your business moving smoothly and agile enough to adapt to the new and unexpected. Here today to help us with outlining a work plan to increase our bottom line is Tina Mowry Hadden, and she is the owner of Mowry Strategies in Altoona. Tina started her public relations and strategic planning business in 2003. She has worked with private businesses, nonprofits, and local governments to guide branding and facilitate business strategies. Most of all, she loves working with startups and businesses needing to bring various departments together to create a shared vision. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tina to talk about strategic planning.
Wonderful. Thanks, Zach. Welcome, everyone. This is the first time I've actually been doing a webinar where I don't see all of you. So as I was talking to Zach, I like to be in a room with people where I can read your faces and know what you need to, if we want to dig down deeper or go to a higher level of a topic. So please use your chat button and ask questions as we go along. You don't need to wait till the end. So I wanted to share a few more interesting facts about your speaker so you know a little bit about me. As Zach said, I have owned my business since 2003. It's now stationed in West Des Moines, so it didn't move far, but moved across the metro. I have worked with companies of all sizes, but really like to work in that sweet spot of about 200 employees or less. I also have some sweet spots as far as categories. I tend to work with people on strategy. I've worked with a lot of different businesses on new product and services, and then team building. So we'll be doing a little bit of that as well, or I'll show you how I do that when I'm working with someone. And then I do get called in to manage crises or change a lot. My background is in journalism, and I worked at big PR agencies both in Washington, D.C. and Chicago before I moved back to Iowa. And so when I moved back to Iowa in 1995, I went to work for Metro Waste Authority as their public affairs director. And after that, I worked with the DOT during the I-235 reconstruction project in the early 2000s before I started my business. Each of these areas where I worked, it was very important to do planning, to do storyboards, to understand where we were going. And so strategic planning really became a love of mine and something that I really enjoy doing. I'm going to share with you, one of the things I'm going to be asking you is your strengths and your weaknesses. And so one of the reasons I wanted to put this slide up was that my strengths are I can adapt quickly to new surroundings, which makes me flexible, confident, and creative. And you'll understand why that's important when we go through the presentation. My weaknesses are that I tend to start moving before anyone else is ready. And that means that I tend to be a very swift decision maker, flexible and confident. And I say take note here because you'll notice that my strengths are flexible and confident, and my weaknesses can also be flexible and confident. And I want us to understand that sometimes our strengths can become our weaknesses as we go through. And so Zach's going to ask you a couple of questions through polls. And so now's the time he's going to do that. I think, Zach, you were going to start with the first poll question. So the question is, have you and or your team taken the time to assess your business today and for the future? This would be in the format of strategic planning. Do you meet regularly to talk about what's going on in the business climate today? is planning part of what you do?
Tina, can you see the results there?
I cannot. Oh, now I
I
can.
forgot to hit share, I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. Well, good. It looks like quite a few of you already do some kind of strategic planning. So we'll talk a little bit about how you can continually improve that process. And then the next question, and I'd like you to really answer this one real seriously or honestly, is if someone were to ask you today what kind of a leader you are, would you be able to share your strengths and weaknesses without hesitation? Pretty much split, yes, yes, no. So that's pretty common. So hopefully what you'll get out of this today is kind of a roadmap a little bit on how you would be able to answer those questions. Okay, let's get started. All right, today you are going to learn, we're going to take you through the importance of strategic planning. I'll share with you a little bit about my process. We'll talk about the steps included in developing a plan that doesn't sit on a shelf, and then the role you play in making that plan work. And that's your self-awareness exercise that we're going to do. So one of the things that I talked about when we were talking about doing this session was that I like to think of strategic planning as a roadmap. And quite honestly, in today's world, we need more than just a roadmap. We need a GPS system. So one of the things that we'll talk about is how we can include technology into your strategic plan. So organizations and people who do not plan, obviously, they're planning to fail. And I can't tell you how many times in the last month I've had people say, well, we just don't even know where to start because of the pandemic. And I'm here to tell you that today is probably the most important time to be planning, because you need to be doing a lot of the if this then what kind of things. And so oftentimes people become very paralyzed in times of crises, and strategic planning is even more important during that time. I like to tell people that a strategic plan can take care of a short period of time, or it can take care of a long period of time. A lot of people have a tough time thinking 10 years down the road, especially if you're a startup. Sometimes I will work with startups and they'll say, well, you know, I think this is what we want to do. And so we'll start with that. And then oftentimes when we come back to the review time, 6 months to 12 months later, they are able to better interject what they want their future to look like. So one thing I want everyone to understand is that a strategic plan is not a, if you don't do this, you fail. It's more of you fail if you don't have one. And so the importance of having a plan and then knowing that it might have to change is better than not having anything at all. And what I often like to tell people is that in the absence of a plan, many organizations work just fine. In fact, I just got done doing a first ever strategic plan for a company, and they've been around for 20 some years. So it's not that they weren't planning, it's just that they were doing more business projections than necessarily a strategic plan. And so they had, what happened in their situation was that they had lots of silos for their different services that they offered, but they had never done a whole strategic plan that everyone participated in. And so it wasn't that they weren't being successful, it was just that they lacked a sense of purpose or an intentionality that comes with having a plan. So before you start planning, there's some things that you really need to think about, and that is, ask the following questions of yourself and your business. And that is, what do we want to do? You know, are we doing it? You know, a lot of times if you're an existing business, you know, are we doing what we said we were going to do? Have we morphed away from our mission? That's also often called mission creep. And that happens probably more in the nonprofit world than anywhere, where a lot of times they'll go after funding or a grant and it kind of pulls them away from their mission. And so making sure that you come back to, what do we want to do? Why did we start this business in the first place? Who wants what we are selling? And will they travel with us? And I use the word travel on purpose because we're talking about strategic planning being a roadmap. And so you know, what is the customer's need and what's their loyalty? And customer loyalty is all over the board right now. But I think that this is probably one of the most important questions that you can ask yourself is, who wants what we are selling? And oftentimes we're not very honest with ourselves about who wants what we are selling. So knowing that and owning it is really important. How will we excel? And what are the indicators or benchmarks that will help us know we are excelling? So this becomes the meat, the goals, and the measurement of your plan. But asking that question of what are the indicators of success, a lot of people forget to answer those questions. And then here's a question for all of you in the audience right now, and that would be, think of where you were 5 years ago. So it's no longer 2020, it's 2015. And think of how much you have changed in those 5 years. Now I want you to really think about where you're going to be in 5 years. And I often have done this with people, and if there are parents in the room, I ask them to think about their child, because we tend to see the changes of our children or those around us more than in ourselves. So 5 years ago, I had a 9-year-old and I had a 22-year-old. Today, I have a 14-year-old and a 27-year-old, and in 5 years, you know, I'm going to have both of them out of school, and both, you know, hopefully one of them really on the path of success, and the other one just starting college. So that starts to resonate in me, and I start to think, okay, what's my personal strategic plan once they're gone, and how does that impact my business? So I really want you to take the time right now just to write down, you know, 2 or 3 things that in 5 years you hope to have accomplished either personally or with your business. Just think about the year 2025. Hopefully we're not in the middle of a pandemic and hopefully we've kind of moved beyond some of the after effect that comes with the pandemic. But let's think about what you want to be doing in 2025. And you don't necessarily have to share that with anyone, but it does kind of make you start to think about what you need to do in order to get a business plan thinking 5 years out. I recently sat in a room with about 10 people, and within those 10 people, there were 3 gentlemen that were over the age of 80. All 3 of them were very successful businessmen, and they were in a room with those of us that were in our 40s and 50s. And we were doing a strategic plan, and one of the 80-year-olds slams his fist down on the table and says, "Think bigger." And the reason that really struck me was that he wanted us to think 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And he was coming up with ideas that he was never going to see come to fruition. His life will be over before those ideas come to fruition. And so it's really hard for some of us to think long term, but I was so amazed by how this gentleman was able to think beyond his life. So those are the kinds of things I really push the people that I'm working with to think beyond and think bigger. One of the things that this slide shows us is that these are the types of questions that we often need research to find. And some small businesses or startups just don't have the funds for formal research. One of the things that my business offers is more of an informal research. And so I have done focus groups. I've done some questions or interviews with either potential customers, stakeholders, investors. I might even go out and do some research into the competition. Whatever you can afford to do, I encourage you to get that research up front. So formal, informal, whatever it might be, that research, that time that you take to ask outside of yourself what's going on in the business world, in your industry, and specifically with your product or service will benefit you. So the elements of a strategic plan really answer three questions. There's the why, there's the what, and there's the how. And it's really that simple. A lot of times people want to try to make it much more complicated, but I try to keep these three circles in mind whenever I'm working with someone. So elements of the strategic planning process that I provide. So we talked about gathering facts, that research, the focus groups, those interviews with customers, that kind of thing. Then once you have that information, you go into what is called the SWOT. So I'm sure that most of you have done this. This is the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats. And then you go into the dream big. And that's really where I say, okay, think 10 years down the road. And what do you hope to accomplish? And it was really interesting. I was just working with a client about 6 months ago, and I asked this question of her. She was the CEO, and she said, in 10 years, I want to be retired. And, you know, she was relatively young. She was only 40. So she has plans to retire at the age of 50. So that became very interesting for us as we went through the strategic planning process, because that was really the first time her direct reports had heard her say that. And all of a sudden, that big dream became everyone's big dream. Like, okay, well, if she's planning on retiring in 10 years, and that, how does that shift what I am doing in my role, and where does that take me? So that was, you know, when I ask people to dream big, oftentimes there's some aha moments for the people that are around the table. Develop a strategic planning matrix. And when I say that, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the SWOT analysis and the matrix. So I'll come back to that in just a moment. And then define the elements of your plan. So the short and long-term goals, the objectives, which usually is where the measurement is, action steps needed, timeline, who owns it, all of that. And then build in an element of your plan that is the review and adjust. So a deeper dive into a few of the elements. These strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats really becomes the foundation of your plan. And when I say that, it's because the strengths typically go into some sort of an executive summary. The weaknesses and the opportunities really become what you're going to work on. You know, what is it that we're not doing today that we should be doing better? And what goals are we going to wrap around for that? The opportunities are really, hey, you know, this is the direction we want to go, and how are we going to get there? And then the threats become your what if this, then thinking. And this is probably the most important step right now for people in business, because a lot of people, either they're being very optimistic about what's going to happen in the next 6 months to a year, or they're being very pessimistic about what's going to happen in the next 6 months to a year. And there's no right or wrong answer to that. However, making sure that everyone in the room is on the same page of, you know, if we lose this client, then what? If we lose this market, then what? If we aren't doing this over here, is there a way to pivot our business, which that's the new keyword in the business world today, is pivot. Is there a way to pivot so that we're doing something else? You see this in education right now, where, and a lot of people don't think of education as a business, but it is. It's a big business. And what we've seen is where teachers are used to being in the classroom with their students, they are having to pivot so that they can do online learning. Colleges are having to pivot so that they're providing some sort of a incentive or some sort of a cost benefit to their students, but they're not offering the same product that they've offered in the past. So that, stay tuned to how that kind of plays out, but education will be something to be watching, and how they deliver their product differently in the future. And I think probably the most important thing for people to understand in strategic planning is that every plan begins to take on its own personality at this point. So when people say, oh, don't you just have a template for how you do strategic planning? Yes and no, I do. Yes, I have specific steps that I take, but really, once we've done the fact gathering and we've done the SWOT analysis, each plan starts to take on a little bit of a different look and feel. Some people just want to put everything down on a piece of paper and have it on a piece of paper, and that's fine. That's what I call the roadmap. However, when I talk about a GPS, what I'm talking about is that the the strategic plan has to become a little bit more of its own living and breathing type of being. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. I like to do 3 to 5 year plans. Now, I know I just told you that I like for people to think big, and I do. And oftentimes there will be that big, audacious thing in a plan that is just out there, right? I once worked with a company that they literally had in their strategic plan for probably 5 years what they were going to be doing to um, secure a West Side landfill. And so they never secured the West Side landfill for, actually, I think it ended up being close to 10 years after they brought that up. But it was always in their plan. And they kept it in their plan for a couple of reasons. One, they wanted to keep going through and doing the if-then scenarios. You know, if this opens up, do we have the cash flow to purchase the land? If this opens up, do we have the political will to have a West Side landfill? They wanted to keep it in front of their board members. So every time they reviewed their plan, it was something that was discussed. And they also wanted their employees to understand that their footprint could be growing. And so eventually they did get their West Side landfill, but it was in their plan for over 10 years. But that 3 to 5 year plan is really kind of that sweet spot of people can usually think 3 years down the road. People can usually see 3 years of financial projections. Oftentimes, if you have a line of credit, it might be for that period of time. And so 3 to 5 years is a nice size plan. And then if you'll see the rolling annual review, you always have a 3 to 5 year plan if you review that plan annually. There must be measurement within the plan, and this can happen at the goal portion or it can happen at the objectives portion, but it really has to be measurement. So that's why that upfront fact gathering is so important. Knowing how many clients you serve, knowing how many meals you make, knowing how many widgets you manufacture, whatever it might be, you have to have that initial measurement so that you can say we want to increase productivity by 10% or 3% or whatever that might be. Oftentimes I have people say, well, are we doing objectives? Or are we doing action steps? Is it a mission or is it a vision? Is it, are we doing goals, objectives, strategies, whatever? I always tell people, don't get caught up in terminology. The most important thing is that everyone in the room has the same understanding. And so I've done plans where you have goals, objectives, strategies, action steps, and I've done plans where you have goals and action steps. It doesn't matter how far out you take it necessarily, as long as everyone in the room is on the same page. And then I guess one thing I would like to share with you is the 2 words that if you don't get anything out of today other than these 2 words, the most important 2 words for a strategic planning process and implementation are accountability and communication. And both seem relatively easy and both are extremely hard. So building in how you're going to be accountable to one another and how you're going to communicate, whether you're on target, off target, did we forget something in the plan? Did we, last year, in the fall of 2019, there wasn't one client that I worked with that was talking about what to do if there was a pandemic. So, we did a lot of quick moving in early March, April, May, still doing some quick moving with some others that wanted to take a little bit more time. But understanding that there's always going to be something that comes up that maybe you didn't think about. So your finished product, let me show you. This is a finished product that I just got done doing. It's a nice bound plan. It has different tabs. It's a 2020 to 2024 plan. It's for Barker Lamar companies, which maybe you guys know them. They're a local company, environmental consulting firm that actually, since they've done this plan, they have rebranded their entire company and they have a new name. So it's been an interesting journey with them. But the finished product has an executive summary. It describes the research that they did. It has their mission and their vision. It has their values for their company, goals, action steps, objectives, a timeline, and who is responsible. And then it has a review process and expectations for communication. Within that review process, they've decided that they're going to try to have each team include the business and the strategic plan in their business meetings. And so every week, these teams are talking about what their goals are. Have we met them? How are you doing on this part or this part? And then each quarter, their CEO is sharing what their progress is on their plan. It's pretty cool. I would encourage you to have some fun with it. And this is where the GPS part of the plan comes into play. Dress this baby up. How can you do a nice document like this and then encourage people to have it on their desk to look at? Or how do you launch the plan once you've put all this time and effort into it? How do you make sure that everyone within the company is on board and knows what's going on? And then, like I said, make the reviews part of a monthly and quarterly meetings. But there's other things that you can also do, and things like, think about how technology can boost your plan. Specifically, can you include that plan in your intranet? Are there dashboards that you can set up so that everyone's seeing that? This is where the GPS part of an original roadmap comes up. Continually learning about your style as a company and the success that you're having by interfacing with your customers regularly. That you can do that through blogs and social media and podcasts. And how are you doing to, how are you incorporating those things into your everyday work? So the days of a strategic plan sitting on a shelf should be over. And how do you engage your team and your customers daily into your planning process? Not necessarily having them be part of the process, but having them be part of the implementation. This is that Barker Lamar that I told you about. If you'd like to go to their website, you can see how they've done a nice job of basically saying Barker Lamar is now known as Evora Group. New name, same exceptional service, and came up with a new logo, a new name, new mission, new vision, and it just kind of happened. I mean, it was just something that through the strategic planning process, I think it just became very evident to all of them that it was time to move away from the names of the people who started the business and move more into something that describes what they do. So take some time to look at that after we get done, but that's a great example of how they have really taken the strategic planning to heart. They had all of their directors be a part of it. We went even down deep over a year's time and met with each individual department and all of their employees. So everyone has buy-in to the direction that the organization is going, and pretty much everyone knows what role they play in making it happen. Which takes us into the next part of our session, and we've got about, do we have any questions yet, Zach?
We've got a few general questions. I don't know if you want to start now or
Sure.
save that
Yeah,
till the end.
let's ask those general questions now, and then we can go into the role, their role in planning.
Okay. In no particular order, first question, with COVID-19, what thoughts and different ways of operation have you seen companies add into their strategic plans?
Great question. About 2 weeks ago, I facilitated a session with a small company, female CEO, and they had all, gone into quarantine like most of us did back in April, May, and June. They had started to bring back all of their employees in June and July, in various patterns. They weren't all in the building at once. However, we were meeting about 2 weeks before school was about to start. And so one of the strategies that came out of that session was that they were going to allow for voluntary quarantining again by their employees through the month of August, September, and possibly October, so that parents could go home and be home for the various educational models that they were all being faced with. And since there are only about 50 people in their company, they really needed to mitigate their exposure to the virus. So rather than having everyone coming in and their kids are all going to different schools, they decided to just really push everyone back home. They were being very productive in their online and distance work, and allow parents to have a little bit more freedom in their day, especially if they had kids that were doing the A-B model, which a lot of people do, where their kids might be in school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but they're home on Monday and Wednesday and Friday, and then switch it. So that was one thing that they've done. Another thing that I saw another company do was just changing the services that they offer. It was no longer made sense for them to, and this was in the restaurant business, I mean, being able to really quickly change the way that they ordered their supplies and the way that they interfaced with their customer, so that it was more real time rather than planning for people to come into their restaurant. And so that's really taken a lot of creativity on their part, but some of them have done it very well.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Tangentially related, I guess maybe even more than that, what are some ways to help you and your team compromise on a topic or change that people feel very differently about?
That's a really good question, because some people view compromising as a lose-lose situation. Some people view it as a win-win situation. It just really kind of depends on how you look at it. I'm going to share with you a process that I use for leadership preferences, but this is a good time to share with you the group level preferences. And so I don't know, I couldn't get this on, but can you guys see that? I will make sure that you have this for the follow-up, but this is group level preferences. And so let's just take this question and assume that a compromise would be, what would the compromise be between cost of service and quality of service? And oftentimes it's an either or. And it really doesn't need to be an either or, it needs to be an and. And so I tend to push people past the compromise and figure out how we can get to an and both mindset as opposed to an or mindset. And that's a really strong muscle to exercise if you can, to get away from saying or and but, which we tend to say a lot when we're, but have you thought about this? Or can we do this? And the reality is, in a group setting, if we can get to and both and start to realize the benefits that might come from that kind of thinking, all of a sudden, instead of an internal focus or an external focus, it becomes and. instead of a my department versus other departments, it becomes and. So I guess when it comes to compromise, I try not to even bring that word into the planning process. I try to get a feel for what are some of the organizational dynamics going on and try to create an and both scenario. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but that's how I try to work it.
I think that was great. Thank you. And if I think I mentioned already, if I hadn't, we'll send out a follow-up email for registrants. So any of these links or resources that are being mentioned, we will include those in the email. We have a couple more. I think I'll save them for after the next section.
Okay, perfect. All right. So my greatest thing that I've started teaching people when I go in to do strategic planning is the importance of self-awareness. And I can't stress this enough. And that is that if we are not self-aware, then we cannot be a good team player. And I think it's really important for people to understand that. And so one of the things I have listed on this slide is polarity training. You can actually Google it. It is a national training program. I've gone through all levels of the training, and it's just an easy way to assess a room. So everyone has done, well, I shouldn't say everyone, but most people in the business world do things like Myers-Briggs, or they might do predictive index. They might do the 6 hats that you wear, all of which are great tools. So I would totally encourage people to do those. The polarity training is something that can happen right in the room. And it's a very simple process, but it allows us to kind of start to know ourselves and those around us a little bit better. So on the screen, you're going to see these leadership preferences. These are leadership preferences that have actually been pulled together by the polarity training experts. These are characteristics that every leader has. There's a few more. I just put what I could fit on the screen. I think I have, 8 there, and I think there's 12. These were the ones that I thought we could go over today. So what I'd like you to do in the audience is I'd like you to look at the screen, and I'd like you to take a minute, and I want you to write down the one that you prefer. So for instance, notice that there are 2 to choose from. It's either task or relationship. And the items on the left correspond with the item on the right. And what I want you to do is I want you to pick the one in general that you prefer in your work life. So do you prefer task or do you prefer relationship? And if one is harder for you to decide, like, oh man, I can't decide, am I task or am I relationship? I want you to asterisk that. So I'm going to give you about a minute to go through and decide, but at the end of the exercise, you should have a word written down that you prefer out of each one, and then an asterisk if it was hard for you to decide. Go ahead and go. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. So I'm going to take us to the next slide. And I'm going to just walk you, since I'm not there to go through this with you in person, I'll walk you through what I chose, and I'll use myself as an example. So I chose confidence, flexible, and creative. And if you notice, you'll see that the choice was confidence or humility, it was structure or flexibility, and it was logic or creativity. I'm just using these as an example. If I had you in a room, I would go through each one, and everyone in the room that's on a team, we would know, we would split up into groups. So when I pick these, what I'm thinking is that from a confidence standpoint, I'm willing to lead. And from a flexible standpoint, I can adapt to change very easily. And from a creative standpoint, I can find new ways to look at a problem and I can find the solution. These are my strengths. I know them really, really well. And I also know that with each one of these, there's an opposite. And so sometimes to people who are in the room with me, my strengths can also be my blind spot, and it can lead to my greatest weakness. So, for example, I think I'm coming across as confident and I take control, or confident and I'm willing to lead, but some people might look at me like I take control. And that can sometimes be a bad thing, right? Um, I think I'm flexible and that that's a good thing, and that I can adapt to change really easily. And others might view me as someone who flies by the seat of my pants. And where I think my creativity is something really, really wonderful, others might say that I don't follow the rules. And so that's a really hard thing for me to, it was really hard for me to understand at first, but being told what some of these blind spots were allows me to then look at this and think, okay, I want to come up with what are the benefits of being both confident and humble? What are the benefits of being flexible and structured? What are the benefits of being creative and logical, right? And so if you recall, I asked you early on when we were choosing to asterisk those that were hard for you. And an example would be that creative and logical was a very hard one for me to asterisk, or for me to choose. So I asterisk that. And what that means is I do a pretty good job of balancing creative and logical. So I'm already working both muscles. Now, confidence and flexible, I circled those right away because that's what I am. And when I'm stressed, I go to confidence and flexible. And I have to remind myself that there are benefits to being humble and structured. And so I really have to focus on what are those benefits of humble and structured so that I exercise both things, both muscles. So I hope that that kind of helps you. But what happens is oftentimes, like when I've done a strategy session for a group of HR professionals, for example, oftentimes people within certain industries end up circling the same thing. It's really funny when you do a room full of accountants. So, so what happens is you get a lot of group think going on, and they don't take the time to see the other side. And so becomes very important when you're building your team to make sure that you have people who are either really, really good at balancing both creativity and logic, or flexible and structured, or you make sure that you've got people who hold on to each pole in the room. So I might be really flexible and there might be someone sitting next to me who's really structured, and we might butt heads all the time, but it's really good that we're both in the room because we see things differently. So I hope that that helps you a little bit. Or let's, I don't know, we can kind of close down the presentation and then we can ask final questions. But the elements of our time together, which was really fast, and these 45 minutes, 50 minutes go really fast, but the biggest thing to take away is strategic planning is a journey and it's not a destination. So constantly thinking about what you want that journey to be and reviewing your strategic plan is very, very important. There are no shortcuts, but there are lots of detours. Knowing the strengths you bring to the process is very, very, very important. And understanding the team's strengths is even more important. Strategic plans take on their own personalities, and there are no two that are the same. It is always best to bring in an outside facilitator, and I tell people that not to toot my own horn, but I really, truly believe, like even when I am sitting on a board and I think I'm a pretty good at removing myself from the situation, I can facilitate it. If I if I'm part of the group, it's better to bring someone from the outside to be the facilitator. Whether you get that person for free, whether you pay that person, it will be worth every cent that you could pay them in order to have that outside person kind of leading the discussion. And I guess if I don't leave you with anything else today, have fun with this process. Show your passion when you're going through it and continually learn as you're going through it. Be very curious all the time on how you can improve your process. And with that, I guess I can open it up for more questions. Zach, I think you had a few.
I do, and we have not a question, but a comment that really speaks to your last couple points. Every time I do activities like this, I'm reminded that the way I prefer to lead is completely opposite from how I like to be led, from one of our participants.
Oh, that's interesting. Good.
So I have a couple questions. This first one's maybe a little expansive, but what's your advice on creating a mission for a company?
Oh, missions and visions and values are so tough. They're so important, but they're tough. If you are a startup, I suggest sitting in a room with either your stakeholders, your investors, your team, and just really hammering out what your values are, and then that allows you to kind of start working backwards to your vision and your mission. If you are an existing company, for example, the Barker Lamar, who changed their name, their values didn't really change, which was interesting. It wasn't a matter of changing their values or changing what they were doing. It was more a matter of changing, just trying to get beyond the names of the founders. So I guess with the mission and vision, I would say that sometimes it works best with an existing mission and vision if you have a small breakout committee that works on it and then brings ideas back to the group. I've often asked people to just write down keywords that they would like to see in the mission and vision, and then I have written them for them after I've gotten to know them. So there's lots of different, there's no wrong way of doing it. There's just lots of different ways of doing it.
That's a good answer. I have maybe one more from the group here. How do you support your team in being excited about strategy planning and potential changes?
I forget that most people don't get, really passionate about this like I do. I do think that bringing in an outside facilitator helps create that enthusiasm. I think that instilling people, a lot of people are afraid of strategic planning because they think that they're going to fail if they don't achieve the goal. And because we're all so literal these days. And I really encourage people not to be literal when it comes to strategic planning, but to understand that it's a fluid, living document that goes with the team. And so lots of things change throughout a year. Someone might leave the company, someone might come to the company, a pandemic might happen. You might have someone die. There might be someone who leaves for maternity leave. I mean, there's all kinds of things that happen because life happens. And so not reaching the goal at the set time, it does not make you a failure. Unfortunately, a lot of managers tie the pay increases and all that kind of stuff to meeting your goals. And I guess they have to tie it to something, right? So this is where my creativity sometimes gets me in trouble because I'm not very structured when it comes to to these kinds of things, but I really encourage people not to think of it as a failure. And then I think people come to the table a little bit more excited about it.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Something that a lot of people are feeling. It says, starting a strategic plan feels intimidating. What should I do to get the ball rolling? What would you suggest my first couple steps are?
Well, I really do think that that simple SWOT analysis gets the ball rolling. And if you can get a group of people in a room and honestly talk about your strengths as a company, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats, then you start to have a lot of those if-then conversations, and it just kind of starts going from there. That's why I said that really that becomes the foundation of your plan, because out of that discussion, you learn what you need to improve, you learn what opportunities are there that for the taking, what resources have to be put out in order to make those opportunities a reality. You know, who needs to be on the team. Yeah, a lot of times strategic planning leads to organizational realignment because they realize that the business is going in this direction and they don't have, you know, this expertise. And so then they have to find that expertise. And so that means hiring another person. And it just, you know, allows you to grow. I do think that making it a part of your weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever it might be, so that it becomes a part of what you do is really, really important. And maybe take some of the intimidation away because it just becomes part of what you do.
Okay, great content, great questions, everybody. Thank you.
I wanted to
we can
end
go
with
ahead and
some wise words from my mom, which the big joke always was when she was alive was that she was never ever lost. She loved to get in the car and she loved to go for road trips, which is kind of why I tend to do the whole roadmap kind of thing. But she always used to say, well, you're never really lost as long as you keep moving. And I guess that's what I want to leave all of you with is that as long as you keep moving, then your strategic plan just kind of keeps moving with you. So thank you very much for spending your hour with me.
I like that. Okay, a couple last things. We've been putting out a lot of digital content over the last few months, which is great, but I want to acknowledge that not everybody learns best in that way. So if you're not getting the resources or the help that you need from our current content, please make sure you reach out to our team. Go to our website, schedule some one-on-one time. All of us are happy to meet with everybody and talk about whatever you need help with. Last thing, we have a lot of new and exciting education programs, new ones rolling out over the next few months that are geared towards helping business owners at every stage of development. So please check our website for more information in the coming weeks. I think I mentioned we will also send out a follow-up email for registrants that provides relevant links, resources, and contact info for our presenter. And with that, I want to say once again, thanks to Tina Mowry Hadden for an excellent session today and to everyone who joined us. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.